Does the Stefon Diggs trade tell us anything about the Tee Higgins market? Plus, let's catch up on all the Bengals official draft visits.
You are Locked On Bengals, your daily Cincinnati Bengals podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What up, Bengals fans, and welcome to another episode of the Locked On Bengals podcast. I'm your host, Jake Lisco. He's your host, James Rapine. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network here on Locked On Bengals, bringing you coverage every day of your favorite team. We're on YouTube. We're everywhere you get your podcasts. If you're new to the show and you'd like daily Bengals news and analysis, great time to hit that subscribe button. Great time to hit the thumbs up on YouTube. Great time to become an everydayer on Locked On Bengals with the draft right around the corner. And we'll keep you up to date on all things leading into the draft and have you covered, of course, over the draft weekend as well. James, today we're going to talk about the Stefon Diggs trade. The Bills ship him out to Houston. They eat a bunch of dead money in doing so. In fact, they lose cap space to trade Stefon Diggs. An additional $3.5 million accelerates into 2024. They were desperate to be rid of him, but despite that desperation, which you can extrapolate from the fact that they're taking on additional cap penalties, is a return light, a second round pick, a future second round pick at that, and they're sending picks back along with Diggs, who's still productive, yes, entering his age 31 season, but a future second round pick?
It's not a lot. And so it's one of those scenarios where you look at it from the Houston side and it's like, yeah, take a flyer on a guy who's had 6 straight 1,000-yard seasons. Take a flyer on a guy who walks in and instantly is wide receiver one, gives your room credibility, is someone that teams and opposing defenses have to focus on and potentially double team in key moments. Oh, and by the way, you have Nico Collins, you have Tank Dell, you have Dalton Schultz, and you can make all of this work without really thinking about it because you have a quarterback on a rookie deal. So makes a ton of sense from their perspective. They didn't give up a lot, to your point. On the other side, I think we've known sort of since the Bengals kicked the crap out of the Bills in the divisional round, way back when. It feels like ages ago, but it was really just the playoffs last season into 2022. Since then, things have felt off between Stefon Diggs and the Bills organization. And clearly they're off because of the dead money that they're taking on. I think it's $30-ish million in dead money for a receiver to play elsewhere. And they're taking it all on this year. So look, it's clear that the Bills wanted him out of the building. It's clear that Houston is trying to win in this window. And so I think it makes sense for both teams. How it applies to the Bengals and Tee Higgins, I think, is a different story.
Yeah, I think that it's not a clear comparison between Diggs and Tee Higgins for a couple of reasons. One, that contract that Houston inherits for Diggs is essentially a bunch of team options. They're not on the hook for any dead money at any point. If it doesn't work out, they're out a future second round pick, which is bad. Don't get me wrong. But if it doesn't work out, they can get out of that deal at any point in time. Also, it's only like $18.5 million per year over the next 3 years. Whatever team acquires Tee Higgins services is getting a younger player, a player with, unfortunately, a greater track record of injuries, despite being younger, a player that, because of those injuries, hasn't been as productive, unfortunately, as Diggs, but when he's on the field, is certainly a comparable player to Stefon Diggs and has youth on his side. The other side of that is, from a money perspective, Tee Higgins is going to be much more expensive for the next few years for whatever team gets him than Stefon Diggs, and you're not going to have such a flexible contract. So from a production perspective, there are some differences. From an injury history perspective, there are some differences. From an age perspective, there's a massive difference. And maybe perhaps the most important difference when you compare these players is the age discrepancy between the two of them. Go back to Julio Jones, for example, as many have when talking about the Stefon Diggs trade. He was coming off an injury, yes, but promptly fell off a cliff in his age 32, 31 season. So you're at that part of Stefon Diggs' career where a decline could be coming, and it could be coming quickly. But for the Texans, you can see why they would do it. That said, I don't know how much we can really glean from this as far as what the Bengals might be getting offered for Tee Higgins, other than teams are seeing that there are options out there that don't involve giving up a ton of draft capital, and they're not interested in doing so for Higgins, at least as far as we know.
Sure. And if you're the Bengals, let's just say it was straight up. If the Texans said, we'll give you that 2025 second for Tee Higgins, are the Bengals doing that? The answer is probably no. And that's just straight up. And they didn't even have to give it. They got picks back, of course, including one this year. But straight up, I think the Bengals would say, we're trying to win now. And so it's really hard to find the trade that makes the Bengals better now and also fits the description of what they want in return. Now, maybe it's out there. I don't know exactly what the offers have been, if they've gotten that far. But I think it's much different. The Stefon Diggs situation is much closer. And I'm not saying that the Bills would have cut Diggs, but it's closer to Mixon. And the fact that the Bengals had kind of decided, all right, we're moving on from this player, than it is Tee Higgins. I get it. It's a star receiver. He was a Pro Bowler last year, 6 straight 1,000 yards, all of those things. But with T, I don't really think this impacts it at all because Houston, they're fine going year to year with Stefon Diggs. It makes sense for their window. They can cut bait really at any time, and they're not giving up a ton. If they had traded for T, they're going all in with T and extending him and all of those things. And I'm not saying that they wouldn't do it, but it would have cost more to do it because we know the Bengals aren't giving away Tee Higgins. So I think that's one doesn't impact the other because of the uniqueness of Diggs, from his age to his contract to where he was with the Bills. And clearly the Bills want to get rid of Stefon Diggs and get him on another team. I mean, heck, they traded him to an AFC team that is going to contend. That tells you all you need to know about how bad they wanted to get him out of the building.
Yeah, I mean, there's no two ways about it. I think that's a very clear interpretation of the situation. The Bills wanted to get Diggs off the roster. They wanted to move on. And honestly, to get a second-round pick, even if it's a future second-round pick for a guy that you're in that situation with, is something of a win, perhaps, for the Bills, who also needed to reset their salary cap situation. So that's why they're taking all the pain this year. And this could be a down year for the Bills, which maybe they're acknowledging. They're saying, you know what? This year, we're really cash strapped. We are going to just take all the pain this year. We'll reset the cap next year. We still have Josh Allen. We still think we can make a run. If we draft well, we can still obviously be contenders in the AFC. But to your point, trading him to a contender in the AFC is really something. And the Texans are a team that could have traded for Tee Higgins. They have the cap space to do it. Their young receivers aren't going to be up for extensions imminently, so you wouldn't have a ton of overlap there where they're worried about paying 2 guys. But like I said, for the rest of the NFL, I think the way they've seen it to this point is we can pay less in multiple ways, both from a financial perspective and or a draft capital perspective, to go for these other options in trades or free agency or whatever it is, or just wait for the draft where it's a really deep receiver class. And these are a lot of reasons I think the Bengals are probably not getting close to the kind of trade compensation they're looking for if they're getting offers on Tee Higgins at all.
For sure. And the Bengals, they know it's a great receiver class too. That's part of why I talk about receiver on day 2. You want to get one of these guys. One more thing, just praising Houston. They moved down with Minnesota in the draft this year, and they used the second rounder they got to facilitate this deal. So they essentially moved down in the draft, and they walk into Stefon Diggs. So that's fun. Now, there will be some that say, hey, why don't the Bengals make moves like this? And those would look at Diggs and say, hey, we have Tee Higgins, we have Jamar Chase. We want to address our playmakers, and we're going to do that in the draft. I think that's how they view that room right now. And I'm not sure they were ever even discussing the idea of a Diggs deal.
Well, they also, when Joe Burrow was on his rookie deal, spent a whole bunch of money in other ways. They spent it on a bunch of players that are now seeing their contracts either expire or nearly expire with the team on Joe Burrow's rookie contract window. The Texans, right to do so, with Stroud on his. Meanwhile, speaking of the draft and rookie contracts, the Bengals had their most notable and high priority official draft visit. They hosted Troy Fautanu. We'll talk about that visit, what it means, and catch up on the rest of the Bengals' known pre-draft visits coming up next.
Did you know that even if you have a 401k for retirement, you can still have an IRA? Robinhood has the only IRA that gives you a 3% boost on every dollar you contribute when you subscribe to Robinhood Gold. But get this, now through April 30th, Robinhood is even boosting every single dollar you transfer in from other retirement accounts with a 3% match. That's right, no cap on the 3% match. Robinhood Gold gets you the most for your retirement thanks to their IRA with a 3% match. This offer is good through April 30th. Get started at robinhood.com/boost. Subscription fees apply. And now for some legal info. Investing involves risk, including loss. Limitations apply to IRAs and 401ks. 3% match requires Robinhood Gold for a 1 year or for 1 year from the date of the first 3% match. Must keep Robinhood IRA for 5 years. The 3% matching on transfers is subject to terms and conditions. Robinhood IRA available to U.S. customers in good standing. Robinhood Financial LLC member SIPC is a registered broker-dealer.
The Cincinnati Bengals hosted Washington left tackle Troy Fautanu on a official pre-draft visit, according to Jordan Schultz. That happened on Tuesday, April 2nd. And that is, for the list of guys we're going to talk about, by far the highest ranked consensus player the Bengals have had in. And a lot of people do project Fautanu to guard in the NFL. Others see him as a guy that can play all 5 positions in the NFL. Daniel Jeremiah's new big board, just to shout it out, that he posted on Wednesday, Fautanu comes in at 11th on that board. So a very high profile prospect here. And these visits don't necessarily mean that the Bengals are even strictly interested in the player. It could mean that they're interested in getting to know them better and completing their research. And that research may require an in-person visit in some cases to really vet a player. Think back to DeJuan Jones, for example, last year, a player that I don't think the Bengals were interested in necessarily drafting after that official visit, which may have been a local visit because of the proximity to Ohio State. But nonetheless, Troy Fautanu, a premium target, a potential first-round target for the Bengals that's visited them in person.
Yeah, it's a big one. And when we saw the news, it was shortly after we recorded our Wednesday show. And it was like, oh, okay. Well, how does he fit? And that led to a lot of discussion on Bengals social media and draft Twitter. And look, I think it's simple. One, I'm not going to knock the Bengals for at any moment looking at it and saying, hey, we want to bring in for a visit an athletic, versatile offensive lineman that could be available in round 1. They should do their due diligence. What's interesting about it is you look at him and he's not the tallest guy. He's 6'3.5". He's 317, tested really well on the agility and all, or he didn't do the agility, did everything but the agility, but tested really well. And so looks like he's a really good athlete. Would the Bengals take their future starting left guard? And by future, I mean in September, left guard with the 18th pick. I'm not sure that he would beat out Trent Brown for the starting right tackle job. Would they be willing to plug him in at guard? Would he be able to beat out Cordell Volson? Would they be willing to take an interior lineman that early? I think those are the questions, because and maybe Fautanu could beat out Trent Brown and it's all a moot point, but I don't see that right away. Maybe I'm wrong, but transitioning from left tackle to right tackle is one thing. Moving from left tackle to left guard, a position that he did play a little bit, started a couple games out at Washington. I don't think that that's too much to ask, and I do think he could potentially be an upgrade there if you did get him.
The Bengals' plan for Fautanu, if they were to pick him, is something that would be very interesting to follow. Would it be left guard right away? How do you prepare him to play right tackle in the NFL in a world where Trent Brown has about a 33% chance historically of making it through the season, and you might need a backup right tackle to step in? Would you then ask him to make an in-season transition that you've already asked him to go from left tackle to left guard. You've already asked him to kick inside in this
Mhm.
potential scenario. Would you then ask him to make an in-season transition to right tackle, or are you just going to Cody Ford or even Jackson Carman at that point, and Cordell Volson remains a backup on the interior offensive line? Daniel Jeremiah, by the way, sees Fautanu as a guy that can play all 5 spots, including center, which is very interesting. He does have crazy athleticism and
Mhm.
moved extremely well in the positional drills, even if he didn't run through the 3-cone and short shuttle, but has good length. He's a little bit short, but despite being one of the shorter tackles in this class, 6'3", almost 6'4", isn't really short, but for offensive tackles is a little bit short, but still has 34.5-inch arms, a good wingspan, solid enough weight. 317 is a good number there. The only downside really is that he's 23 and a half. He's a little bit older, and you probably be asking him to make a position change. And that's probably why you bring him in for the visit, is to get a feel for some of those things. Does the athleticism, do the traits translate mentally for a potential position change? But my thing with Fautanu, James, is that I think there's merit to letting him compete for right tackle right away. And it's kind of a tricky scenario for the Bengals. Either way, you're asking him to change positions, right? But would you rather him have to potentially make an in-season transition to right tackle, or would you rather get ahead of it versus do you get your best 5 on the field hypothetically if Trent Brown can make it through the season and Fautanu is your left guard and Volson is now quality depth? And I think that is a difficult decision in my mind, at least, because the in-season transition is a little bit scary.
The question to me is simple. If you start him at left guard, start his career there, are you willing to leave him there? Because what if he's just really good there?
Yeah.
And that's the risk. To your point, you could just say, all right, let's work you in at tackle. Let's see how you're feeling. You'll compete. And worst case, he's your swing tackle year 1, which, you know who else could be your swing tackle? Any offensive lineman, any offensive tackle they draft early could end up being their swing tackle. So then it's no different than drafting an Amarius Mims or drafting JC Latham or drafting whoever that we project or we think that they would plug in at right tackle, have them compete with Trent Brown. And then I think Trent Brown has the edge on most of these guys that they could potentially get. And so will that rookie impress enough to win the starting job, or will that guy be sort of the swing or just be the backup right tackle and Trent Brown could be your swing? I think that's an interesting dynamic, but it's cool to see them bring him in, and clearly he's on their radar. And we've talked a lot about athleticism and offensive linemen, and they need more athleticism. Well, they're looking at it with Troy Fautanu, and so that's good to see. And you mentioned 11 on Daniel Jeremiah's board. I think he's 12 on Lance Zierlein's board, so he's pretty high on a lot of these boards. And I do think there's a realistic scenario where he does make it to 18. I don't think that's crazy. And so for the Bengals to prepare themselves for that scenario and have a plan in place to where, hey, let's take him, let's not take him, they're clearly going to be prepared. And that's all you can really ask for going into the draft.
Yeah, he's 22 on our consensus board that we've been
Yeah.
tracking so far. So he's pretty high for some people, but there's some division there. Probably, some people see him as a guard, and that's going to impact where they have him ranked. But the only thing that I think could really push him down too far in the draft would be one, that teams see him as a guard. They're not willing to spend that top premium pick on a guard. And two, he's 23 and a half. And the other premium tackles in this class, the Joe Waltz, Olu Fashanus, Amarius Mims, Fuaga, even JC Latham, are all 22 or younger. And so if the age thing does impact draft capital willingness from NFL teams, that's where he might be available. And I'm sure the Bengals have done plenty of due diligence on all of these top tackle candidates that they think might be available to them. And it's interesting that Fautanu is the first one that we've heard anyway has come for an official visit. But we talked about Mason Smith yesterday, LSU defensive tackle. What's it yesterday?
Nope. We're pivoting. The Bengals are hosting a top offensive lineman. This is what we get. We actually recorded at the right time today, Jake.
Okay.
I will react to it. Jake will react to it as well. Coming up next.
This episode of Locked On Bengals is sponsored by Gametime, now an authorized ticket marketplace in Major League Baseball. They've got those last minute deals, all in prices, views from your seat, and a great lowest price guarantee to take the guesswork out of buying tickets, including now for Major League Baseball. They've got those last minute deals that we love all the way up to and after event start. You can get up to 60% off of tickets when you buy last minute for sports, concerts, comedy, theater, and more. They've also got all in pricing, so you'll see the prices up front with no surprise fees at checkout. My favorite feature, get a panoramic view from your seat with seat views in the app before you buy. The lowest price guarantee, nothing to laugh at either. You'll get 110% of the difference if you find tickets cheaper elsewhere. Right now, you can get $20 off your purchase with the Gametime app, where you can take the guesswork out of buying tickets. Download the Gametime app today. Create an account and use promo code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Again, terms apply. Create an account. Redeem code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off. Download the Gametime app today for last-minute tickets. Lowest price guaranteed.
Passion, drive, and patience. The formula for winning championships is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance, from superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, the part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all of the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to make your car the MVP and bring home huge wins. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit only available to U.S. customers.
James, I have not been able to find this news that has broken as we're recording here on Wednesday afternoon. So who's visiting the Bengals?
Amarius Mims is in Cincinnati as of like 21 minutes ago. So probably roughly 12:30 Eastern time. He posted on his Instagram story with the downtown Cincinnati location. And there we go. There's another one. And I don't think they would consider him at guard. So that fit goes out the door. But if you drafted him at 18, he would compete at right tackle, like you mentioned with Fautanu potentially just going that route. And he would compete at right tackle and have a chance there. The good news with Mims, and the reason I like him, there's a bunch of reasons, but I think he could play both. I think he could be your left tackle or your right tackle this year. And you could work him at both and get him familiar with both and go from there. And so obviously there's a lot to like, but Amarius Mims is in town. Your instant reaction, Jake, since you didn't see it.
Well, I'm not sure that this will work, but I've got the Amarius Mims Instagram post here that I'm holding up for those watching on YouTube. You can see Great American there in the background, downtown Cincinnati, and I can confirm that is Amarius Mims' verified Instagram account. My reaction is that they're continuing to do work on top tackles in this class, and I think this does still fit with our planned topic for this segment, James, and we'll see what we have time for here, but continuing to make sure they are getting all of their questions answered for some of the top tackle prospects in this class that have some questions. Mims is a guy that, as we've discussed in great length, really has a uniquely limited set of experience in the college game where he's played at a high level. He's played at a high level in some really important games against some really good competition, but hasn't played a lot. And there aren't very many tackles coming out that have that first round worthiness or traits or whatever you want to call it, first round profile, that have played as little as Amarius Mims has played football in college. And like I said, he's done it against some good teams. So it's not like a rawness issue strictly. It's an experience issue for Amarius Mims. And so wanting to get him in person makes a lot of sense to me. Get him on the whiteboard, figure out where he's at mentally, because that's really, I think, what you would be concerned about with Mims coming in is the game going to be too fast for him? How much catch-up time might he need if you're considering him with the first-round pick? But like Fautanu, I mean, there's a chance that, and we've seen this in recent mocks done by media members that I respect quite a bit, James, there's a chance all 6 of these top tackles are gone before the Bengals pick. That being said, you're still going to want to make sure you've got your questions answered if you're considering a guy like Fautanu, who has positional questions perhaps, or Mims, who has the experience question, and get that extra touch point with them on an in-depth in-person visit.
Yeah, not shocked at all that they're interested in Mims and want to talk more with him because he fits everything you look for from a physical standpoint, from a trait standpoint. You want to talk about athleticism, size, his build, his length. I mean, whatever you want to say, but it is the experience part. And I will say the Bengals like when players have played in big games, and he's played in the biggest of games, national championships, college football playoff games, and started in those games. So has some experience in big time moments, but to your point, he's not logging 30 plus starts like a lot of these offensive tackles are, like Troy Fautanu is, where he's played multiple years and you've seen him like game in and game out, week in and week out. And so there are some questions there, and hopefully they get answered because I really like Amarius Mims. I think his ceiling, he's going to be lower on a lot of these boards than Troy Fautanu or than JC Latham or a lot of these guys. I think his ceiling is as high as any offensive lineman in this class because of all the traits in the ability. It's a matter of him getting on the field and doing it consistently.
Yeah, as we're tracking it, to your point, the consensus rankings for tackles are Joe Alt 8, and then Olufashanu 14, Fuaga 15, Latham 19, Fautanu 22, and Mims 23. So right in that group, but you're right behind those guys on the consensus board. And like I mentioned, the experience has got to be the predominant issue for him. The only other guy with a remotely similar amount of college snaps is Tyler Guyton, who had 1,095. Amarius Mims, according to PFF, had 803 snaps of playing football in college, which is unusual. It's unusual to see less than 1,000, period. Guyton in the same boat. Olufashanu, the other one that's relatively low at 1,349, but that's still 500 more snaps. That's a lot more playing time for Olufashanu than Amarius Mims had in his time in school. So makes sense to me that they're bringing in these top first round kind of guys for some of these in-person visits. It also makes sense that they've got some day 3 guys that they've brought in for visits as well, and some day 2 guys like Mason Smith, by the way, on Daniel Jeremiah's board, just to update that from yesterday. Mason Smith is 48th now on Daniel Jeremiah's top 50. So while he's in the 70s or so on the consensus board, might be a day 3 on some boards you look at like PFF, 48th on DJ's board. So quite a bit of disparity on Mason Smith as well. But some of the other guys they've brought in are clear third round targets in the defensive trenches. So it's interesting. It's an interesting mix, right? Like they've got their first round offensive tackles that they want to get a closer look at. You've got nose tackle body and Justin Rogers from Auburn, more of a pass rushing traitsy Mason Smith, interior defensive line from LSU, and edge rusher Xavier Thomas from Clemson. Day 3 safety in Dijon Anthony, and then tight end Eric All from Iowa. Some day 3 guys there that they're checking out as well. And I'm sure there are plenty of these visits that we have not heard about, but it's an interesting mix that you can begin to profile top end tackles, day 3 trench players, and guys to kind of fill out the roster. Maybe some special teams thoughts with Eric All and Dijon Anthony as well.
Yeah, I think they're doing their due diligence. I like the idea of double dipping at defensive tackle, and I could totally see that on day 3 or in rounds 3 and in 5 or rounds 3 and 6 or something like that. Or maybe they take one of the guys early that we've talked about, but they're certainly doing their due diligence with guys that are on their radar, are on our radar, or they're putting guys like Justin Rogers on our radar that we haven't necessarily talked about. I will say one more thing on Mims, just could be medicals too. They might want to get a look at it. I know there's some concerns from fans on his health. I'm not really that concerned about that element of it. Injuries happen, but we will see. But I certainly think he's going to be high on their board. And for those that want the Bengals to eye trenches, well, a lot of those players that we've named for pre-draft visits are trenches. So the Bengals are eyeing it for sure. We'll see who they end up getting in a few weeks.
And Mims is a unique freak that should be checks all the boxes except playing time. The size athleticism combo there is extremely rare. And that's why you bring him in, and that's why you would potentially draft him. Yeah, to your point about injuries, we'll find out a little bit more when we get Dane Brugler's Beast later this month. He tends to get a little bit more information about injuries than we have in the general public, and he writes about some of that in the Beast, but the teams know way more than we do. As far as we know with Mims, high ankle sprain, aggravated the ankle sprain, had a hamstring issue running a 40. None of these things terribly uncommon for very large men. And hopefully there's nothing that suggests that he is a chronic injury risk, but that is for the teams to know and for us to find out. Typically, the public does not know nearly as much about injury risks as NFL teams do. But that's going to do it for this episode of the Locked On Bengals podcast. Some interesting stuff happening around the NFL and some interesting trends that we're starting to notice with those top 30 visits. Until next time, thanks for listening to this episode of the Locked On Bengals podcast. Hoo day, and have a good one.